Took 9 years before but I began to play the nightclubs in and around Southern California.
The stage lights are on. The crowd is singing along. But Dwight Yoakam isn't singing back. Minutes into his set at one of the biggest festivals of the year, the 67-year-old country legend suddenly stops, turns, and walks off stage in front of thousands of fans. He comes back. He tries again. Then he leaves a second time. And this time, he does not return. What happened in those few minutes says more about where Dwight Yoakam is right now than any headline. And it is only the beginning of a much bigger story about a man who built a career on refusing to slow down. He walked off stage, and everyone saw it happen. It is June the 2nd, 2024, and Dwight Yoakam is standing in front of a packed crowd at the Railbird Festival in Lexington, Kentucky, less than an hour from the small town where he was born. This was supposed to be a homecoming. One local paper even described him afterward as the pride of Pikeville, returning to the state that raised him. Instead, just moments into his set, Yoakam stops singing, turns away from the microphone, and walks off stage without explanation. The crowd goes quiet, then anxious. A few minutes pass. He comes back out, visibly rattled, and tells the audience he thought he was about to pass out. He manages 2 more songs. Then he is gone again, this time for good, cutting his set short by roughly 10 minutes. According to a fan who spoke to a local outlet, Yoakam told the crowd that in 38 years of performing, this was only the second time he had ever walked off a stage mid-show. That detail alone should stop you. This is a man who has built his entire identity around endurance, around never missing a show, around outworking everyone half his age. And now, twice in nearly 4 decades, his own body had stopped him cold. Context makes the moment even heavier. Railbird was not some minor stop. It was a 2-day festival at Lexington's Red Mile, headlined by Noah Kahan on Saturday and 2-time Grammy winner Chris Stapleton on Sunday, with acts like Margot Price and fellow Kentuckian Tyler Childers rounding out a stacked lineup. Yoakam was not easing into a light schedule either. He had played the anthem in Washington, D.C. with the Mavericks just 2 nights earlier, followed by the In the Pines Festival in Bristol on the Tennessee-Virginia line the very next night, before landing in Lexington for a 3rd straight day of travel and performing. Another headlining show was already booked for June the 13th. This was a road-worn touring schedule for any performer, let alone one in his late 60s. His team moved fast to explain it. A statement posted to social media blamed a combination of heat and humidity, describing what happened as a quick spell of heat exhaustion, and thanked emergency responders and festival staff for their quick response. Fans in the comments flooded the post with relief and support, many sharing their own brushes with heat-related illness at outdoor shows, and some offering tips about hats and light clothing for future dates. One detail made the story stranger, though. Multiple news outlets covering the festival that day described the weather not as blistering, but as unseasonably cool, with steady drizzle and periods of heavy rain rolling through Lexington for most of the afternoon. So, which was it? Heat exhaustion on a rainy, cool day, or something else entirely that just happened to get the more comfortable explanation? Nobody outside of Yoakam's inner circle knows for certain, and speculating about an undisclosed medical condition would not be fair to him. What we do know is exactly what was reported: an emergency response team, a hurried statement, and a fan base left to wonder. However, this was not an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern that had already been building for at least a year before Lexington ever happened. The pattern nobody wanted to talk about. Rewind to 2023, and Dwight Yoakam was already forcing fans to ask uncomfortable questions. That year, he canceled a string of tour dates, with his team citing only vague, unspecified reasons described publicly as unforeseen circumstances. No detailed explanation followed. Shows simply vanished from the schedule. Refunds went out, and fans were left to fill in the blanks themselves. In the absence of real information, speculation did what speculation always does. It grew. Online forums and low-quality entertainment blogs began circulating theories about a serious, possibly chronic illness. One widely shared piece was even titled bluntly, with the question fans kept typing into search engines, framing itself as an investigation into what disease he might be hiding, despite offering no actual medical sourcing. Some of these posts framed unverified rumors as settled fact, treating a canceled tour date as proof of a diagnosis nobody had actually confirmed. Other, more careful outlets pushed back directly against that narrative, pointing out that his documented health issues traced specifically to heat-related incidents and respiratory infections rather than any confirmed chronic condition, and cautioning that spreading unverified rumors as fact only causes an artist unnecessary distress without helping anyone. That kind of coverage does not help anyone. It does not help fans understand what is actually happening, and it does not help an aging performer who deserves the same basic medical privacy as anyone else managing a demanding physical job into his late 60s. There is a more painful layer sitting underneath all of this speculation, too. In October of 2025, Yoakam's own tourmate, Raul Malo of the Mavericks, revealed that his cancer battle had taken a serious turn, forcing the band to cancel its remaining tour dates for the year so Malo could pursue additional treatment. Yoakam posted an emotional tribute online, saying he would deeply miss the joy Malo and his bandmates brought to the stage every night they played together. For fans already anxious about Yoakam's own health, watching him publicly grieve a friend's cancer diagnosis while managing his own unexplained medical episodes only deepened the unease, even though nothing has ever linked the two situations beyond timing and proximity on the same tour circuit. What can be stated honestly, without crossing into invented diagnosis, is this: Yoakam has now had multiple public, physically visible incidents on stage within roughly a 2-year window, at least 2 of them serious enough to end a performance outright. There is also a stranger thread running alongside all of this. Around the same period, Yoakam's team felt the need to publicly warn fans about imposters operating on social media, accounts falsely claiming to speak for him or represent him. For a performer already facing public scrutiny over his health, having to simultaneously fight off fake accounts muddying his own voice online only made it harder for real information to reach real fans. Between the unexplained cancellations, the onstage incidents, and the imposter accounts, an image started to form in the public imagination. An icon in his late 60s, still grinding through a touring schedule that would exhaust performers half his age, showing visible cracks for the first time in a career defined by never showing any at all. To understand why that image landed so hard, and why so many longtime fans reacted with genuine alarm rather than casual concern, you have to understand exactly how far Dwight Yoakam climbed to get here, and exactly how much of his identity was built on being the guy who never stopped, never slowed, and never got rejected twice. Nashville said no, so he built his own door. Long before any of this, Dwight Yoakam was just a kid from Pikeville, Kentucky, raised mostly in Columbus, Ohio, spending summers back in the hills with his grandparents, soaking up bluegrass and country at the source. He attended Northland High School, where he stayed active in music and drama programs, graduating in 1974 before drifting briefly through Ohio State University. He left without finishing. Music was the only real plan. While still gigging locally around Ohio, he crossed paths with a man in Gahanna who promised him a real recording contract, only for the man to turn out to be a con artist with no actual industry connections. Rather than souring him on the whole idea, the experience pushed him to go after something real himself. In 1977, he did what almost every serious country artist of his generation did. He packed up and moved to Nashville. Nashville rejected him almost immediately. The city was deep into its glossy, pop-leaning countrypolitan and urban cowboy era at the time, chasing the next Kenny Rogers, and Yoakam's stripped-down, hard-edged honky-tonk sound had no place in that machine. Instead of trying to fit in, he left. In the late 1970s, he relocated to Los Angeles, where he found something Nashville never offered him: an actual audience willing to listen. He landed a year-long residency at a hardcore punk bar in the San Fernando Valley, adapting his honky-tonk sets to rowdy crowds who had shown up expecting something entirely different, working in covers of the Flying Burrito Brothers alongside his own original material to keep the room engaged on off nights. There, Yoakam met guitarist Pete Anderson, a fellow Nashville reject originally from Detroit, and the two became creative partners. Together, they carved out a place inside Los Angeles' growing cowpunk scene, sharing bills and stages with bands like X, The Blasters, and Los Lobos, groups fusing roots music with punk's raw energy, playing storied rooms like Madame Wong's in Chinatown and Al's Bar downtown. Playing punk clubs as a traditional honky-tonk act should not have worked. It did. In 1984, Yoakam self-released a 6-song EP called A Town South of Bakersfield, and the buzz it generated on California college radio was enough to land him a contract with Reprise Records, with label head Lenny Waronker reportedly treating him as a proud product of the Los Angeles scene rather than an outsider act. 2 years later, in 1986, that EP was expanded and re-released as his debut album, Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., etc. It shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart. Critics who had once questioned his hillbilly credentials suddenly could not stop talking about him. Nashville, the same industry that had shut its doors on him less than a decade earlier, had no choice but to pay attention. But getting the door open was only step one. What came next was the fastest, most explosive run of his entire career, and it set a bar almost no artist could sustain forever. 3 #1s and a hit that changed everything. Once the door opened, Dwight Yoakam did not just walk through it. He sprinted. His first 3 studio albums all hit #1 on the Country Albums chart, an almost unheard-of run for a brand-new artist working entirely outside Nashville's traditional machinery. Hillbilly Deluxe followed his debut by barely 13 months in April of 1987 and produced 4 straight top 10 hits on the country singles chart across 1987 and 1988 alone, an extraordinary hit rate for a sophomore release from an artist Nashville had wanted nothing to do with only a few years earlier. His refusal to relocate back to Nashville came with a real cost, even at his peak. Critics questioned his hillbilly credentials early on simply for building his sound in Los Angeles rather than Music City, and staying on the West Coast likely cost him radio spins and nominations from the Nashville-based Country Music Association, the industry's most powerful gatekeeping body. The Los Angeles-based Academy of Country Music, by contrast, embraced him enthusiastically. That divide, one industry body cool toward him, another celebrating him, became a defining tension of his early career, even as his commercial numbers made the snub increasingly hard to justify. Then came a moment that turned him from a rising star into a genuine cultural fixture. He recorded Streets of Bakersfield as a duet with his own hero, Buck Owens, the man whose sound had shaped Yoakam's entire musical identity growing up. The song became a massive hit, and more than that, it became a bridge, introducing an entire new generation of country fans to the West Coast Bakersfield sound Owens had pioneered decades earlier. It was the kind of moment careers are built on. Not just commercial success, but validation from the very legend Yoakam had spent his life trying to honor. His commercial peak arrived in 1993 with the album This Time. It went triple platinum, the biggest-selling record of his career, and produced 3 top 5 singles, including Fast As You, which climbed all the way to #2 on the country chart, and even crossed over onto the pop-focused Billboard Hot 100. By this point, Yoakam had accumulated multiple Grammy wins among a career total that would eventually reach 21 nominations, sold what would become more than 26 million albums worldwide over his career, and built a reputation as one of the defining voices of what critics were calling the new traditionalist movement, a wave of artists dragging country music back toward its rootsy, unpolished origins after years of pop dilution. For an artist who had been laughed out of Nashville less than a decade earlier, this was about as complete a vindication as show business ever offers. He had proven the industry wrong on his own terms, without ever compromising the sound that got him rejected in the first place. But peaks, by definition, definition are followed by something else. And for Dwight Yoakam, what came immediately after this time would quietly reshape the entire rest of his career in ways almost nobody saw coming at the time. The album that ended his run of hits. In 1995, 2 years after the biggest commercial success of his life, Dwight Yoakam released an album called Gone. On paper, it should have continued the momentum. In reality, it marked a hard, permanent turn. The album's singles told the story on their own. Nothing peaked at only number 20 on the country charts. Gone, That'll Be Me, stalled at 51. Sorry You Ask barely cracked the top 60. A fourth single, Heart of Stone, failed to chart in the United States at all. For an artist who had spent nearly a decade racking up top 10 hits almost automatically, this was an entirely new experience. Gone was also, by most accounts, including those close to the sessions, a genuinely adventurous, experimental record, one Yoakam and his team were proud of musically. His longtime producer called it a beautiful record, and the album's executive producer later admitted the sessions were built around a deliberate willingness to experiment rather than repeat past formulas. But adventurous did not translate into commercial success, and the timing mattered enormously. Around this same period, Yoakam's attention was visibly shifting away from music and toward acting. He had already appeared in films, but his profile as an actor grew substantially through the mid to late 1990s, with a breakout dramatic turn as a menacing boyfriend in Sling Blade in 1996, opposite writer-director Billy Bob Thornton. That growing acting career eventually collided head-on with his music career, and the collision nearly ruined him financially. In 2000, Yoakam wrote, directed, starred in, and scored a Western film called South of Heaven, West of Hell, his only writing and directing credit to date. He assembled a genuinely striking cast, including Thornton, Vince Vaughn, Bridget Fonda, and Peter Fonda. Then, when the original financing fell through shortly before shooting began, Yoakam made the decision to fund the $4 million production largely out of his own pocket, reportedly selling his Malibu home to cover the gap. The film premiered at the Slam Dance Film Festival before a limited theatrical release in December of 2000. It grossed a documented $28,149 at the box office. His own production company later filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, and several crew members pursued small claims lawsuits and union complaints against it. Yoakam himself later described the entire project as the hardest experience of his professional life. To dig out from under that debt, Yoakam cut his touring budget in 2002, forcing his band to accept a significant pay cut. That decision fractured his 20-year partnership with Pete Anderson, the guitarist and producer who had shaped his sound since the Los Angeles club days. The rift never healed. By August of 2004, Anderson had formally sued Yoakam and his touring company in California Superior Court, seeking back salary, unpaid per diem expenses, and a promised percentage of tour proceeds. There would be no more studio albums or stage shows built around the two of them together, ending a run that had produced 13 consecutive records. One biographer who studied his career put it plainly: the more time, and eventually money, Yoakam invested into his film career, the less exclusively he thought of himself as a musical artist. That shift had a permanent consequence that gets lost in most retrospectives of his career. Since the release of Gone in 1995, Dwight Yoakam has not had another top 10 country single, not one in 3 decades. He kept releasing albums, including Population Me in 2003 and 3 Pairs in 2012, the latter featuring a notable collaboration with musician Beck that pulled him back toward his old cowpunk instincts. He kept touring relentlessly, but the version of Dwight Yoakam, who effortlessly landed hit after hit on country radio and who had a 20-year musical partner standing beside him every night, effectively stopped existing in the same handful of years, and he has spent every year since then rebuilding a career from something closer to financial and creative wreckage than most fans ever realized. That reframes everything about where he stands today. This is not simply a story about an artist chasing hits he can no longer land. It is a story about an artist who lost his closest collaborator, nearly bankrupted himself chasing a directing dream, quietly accepted that the hits were behind him, and built something else in their place anyway. Remarkably, 30 years after that turning point, he found a way to make people care again. Right around the same time his body started sending warning signs on stage. An unlikely comeback, arriving at the worst possible moment. In November of 2024, 5 months after the Railbird Festival incident and roughly a year after his mysteriously unexplained 2023 cancellations, Dwight Yoakam released Brighter Days, his 21st studio album and his first new record in 9 years, put out through the independent label 30 Tigers. For an artist who had not landed a top 10 single since the Clinton administration, releasing new music at all was a statement. Releasing it with genuine cultural relevance attached was something else entirely. There was a quieter symmetry to the record that most coverage missed. Brighter Days marked Yoakam producing his own album, decades removed from the long run of records shaped alongside his original guitarist and producer, Pete Anderson, the same collaborator who helped build his signature sound back in the Los Angeles club days. The man who once needed a creative partner standing beside him on every track was now, in his late 60s, running the entire session himself, on an independent label rather than a major. That kind of full creative control does not happen by accident for an artist that far into a career. It reflects someone still actively shaping his own sound, rather than simply touring on autopilot. 30 Tigers itself is worth noting here, since the label has built its reputation specifically around giving established veteran artists room to release music entirely on their own terms, outside the promotional machinery and creative compromises of a traditional major label deal. Choosing that route at 68, after 2 decades on larger labels earlier in his career, was its own quiet statement about how much control Yoakam wanted over what became one of the most closely watched releases of his later career. The rollout itself was carefully built. The lead single, I'll Pay the Price, arrived first to reintroduce his sound to longtime fans. Then came the real headline, a music video for the track I Don't Know How to Say Goodbye, featuring a collaboration with Post Malone, one of the biggest and most unexpected crossover artists in modern music, instantly putting Yoakam's name in front of an audience decades younger than his traditional base. Critics responded warmly, with outlets like No Depression describing the record as Yoakam finding new ways to explore his signature sound rather than simply repeating it. It was not framed as a nostalgia play. It was framed as a legitimate late-career artistic statement, arriving from a man most casual fans had assumed was coasting on his back catalog for years. His touring calendar backed up the momentum. He kept a busy Sirius XM presence hosting his own channel, the Bakersfield Beat, broadcasting the same honky-tonk lineage he had spent his whole career championing directly to subscribers. He added new dates to a run billed as the Cosmic Roundup and Rodeo Tour through 2025, played the Alaska State Fair that August, alongside acts like Foreigner and Weird Al Yankovic, and closed out the year with a high-profile appearance on Nashville's Big Bash New Year's Eve broadcast on December the 31st, a nationally televised slot typically reserved for country music's biggest current names. That is not the schedule of an artist winding down. It is the schedule of someone treating a comeback album like a full campaign, not a token release. His personal life had been quietly transforming too. In 2020, Yoakam married Emily Joyce, and the couple welcomed their first child that same year. A dramatic shift for a performer once known primarily for a string of high-profile relationships and a determinedly unattached public image. For a man who spent decades being written about as country music's most eligible bachelor, settling into marriage and fatherhood in his 60s reframed how longtime fans understood him just as much as any new song did. Then, in November of 2025, came the announcement that pushed his resurgence into an entirely different tier of visibility. A co-headlining run called the Dos Amigos Tour, pairing Yoakam with rock legends ZZ Top, across dozens of dates running from late March through Memorial Day weekend of 2026, alongside a separate slate of solo headlining shows scheduled even earlier in the year. ZZ Top themselves are hardly a warm-up act for anyone, a Texas trio formed in 1969 and inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004, still touring arenas and amphitheaters more than half a century after they started. Pairing with a band of that stature was not a modest booking. It was Yoakam being placed on a marquee alongside one of the most durable acts in American rock history. A health scare serious enough to end a festival set in front of thousands of people. A wave of unexplained cancellations the year before that. And, running in parallel, a genuine late-career creative comeback, a new marriage, a new child, and one of the biggest co-headlining tours of his entire career, all announced within roughly 18 months of each other. Those two storylines are not supposed to coexist. Yet somehow, for Dwight Yoakam right now, they both are true at exactly the same time. How is Dwight Yoakam now? Dwight Yoakam is 69 years old. He has had at least 2 serious, visible health incidents on stage within the last 2 years, one severe enough to end a performance mid-set in front of a hometown crowd. He went through a stretch of unexplained cancellations that his team never fully clarified, leaving a vacuum that low-quality rumor sites happily filled with unverified speculation dressed up as fact. None of that is invented. All of it is documented on the record from his own team's statements and mainstream entertainment reporting. What makes his current run genuinely notable is what it followed. This is a man who watched his run of hit singles quietly end after Gone in 1995, then spent 3 decades rebuilding his public identity almost entirely around film work, touring, and slow, steady credibility rather than chart positions. Very few artists who go 30 years without a top 10 single ever get handed a genuine cultural moment again, let alone one big enough to land a Post Malone collaboration and a stadium run with ZZ Top on the other side of it. Consider how rare that arc actually is in country music specifically, a genre notorious for aging out its stars the moment radio stops playing them. Most of Yoakam's chart contemporaries from the mid-'80s new traditionalist wave have long since settled into nostalgia circuits, playing the same handful of old hits to shrinking crowds. Yoakam, by contrast, is releasing a self-produced album critics are calling genuinely new, working with an artist 30 years his junior, and booking arena dates well into his 70s. That is not survival. That is an active second act, built entirely on his own terms. At the exact same time, this is also a man who has not slowed down in any way that matters. He released his most talked-about album in nearly a decade, self-produced for the first time in a generation, backed by an independent label willing to bet on a 21st studio record from a 68-year-old artist. He built a bridge to an entirely new generation of listeners through a Post Malone collaboration. He got married, became a father, kept a busy state fair and broadcast schedule through 2025, and is now heading into a massive co-headlining amphitheater and arena run alongside one of the most enduring rock bands in American music history. Those two realities are not a contradiction to be resolved. They are simply what it looks like to be an aging icon who built his entire identity on refusing to stop, now facing a body that occasionally disagrees with that plan. The real story here was never really about chart positions or canceled shows in isolation. It is about a man who got rejected by the entire Nashville establishment as a young unknown, built his own path through punk clubs instead, hit a peak most artists never sniff, watched that peak quietly end 3 decades ago without ever publicly admitting defeat, and kept working anyway, year after year, reinventing his own creative process along the way, until his body itself became the only thing capable of making him stop, even briefly. Things are not simply bad for Dwight Yoakam right now. They are complicated, human, and honest in a way most manufactured celebrity narratives never bother to be. He is still standing on stages he has earned the hard way, even on the nights his body tries to tell him not to. If a body that has already forced him off stage twice in 38 years still hasn't managed to slow him down, what do you think actually will? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.